2024 has been terrible for the game industry. It feels like every single week we hear about layoffs and studio closures. And there's just so many questions about the future of gaming and the health of this industry that we love so much. Sony and Microsoft, two of the leaders of this industry, just laid off a bunch of people. And there's questions about their futures as console makers. And of course, today that just kind of continues on as EA is the next publisher to give the unfortunately common news by this point. EA just announced their own mass layoffs, which also includes some high-profile cancellations and even a pivot for their future plans going forward. So, I keep saying it. These topics are never fun, but we are in a changing industry, and also we are in an important part of the gaming history because in certain ways, it's kind of shaping the future of gaming. And depending on who you ask, we are heading into a concerning direction. It's also seemingly impacting studios and how they feel being under a big umbrella. Something else that we're going to talk about today is that in an unexpected twist, another domino fell today in the Activision Blizzard Microsoft buyout. And this is something that was certainly very unexpected. Now, it does make sense in hindsight, but it is unexpected because Toys for Bob decided to leave Activision. Now, it isn't necessarily all bad for Xbox. I know that's going to be a big part of this topic, and I'll kind of explain why here in just a moment. But I do, however, think that this is a great thing for this specific studio. They are now officially independent, and I mean, with everything that's happened here in the last few years, you can kind of understand their reasoning. So let's just go and jump right into this story. We'll circle back to the EA stuff here in a moment. But as for Toys for Bob, let's go and first take a look at their full statement, and then we'll just kind of talk about what it actually means for them, Xbox, and their futures. So their statement reads, "We're going indie. We're thrilled to announce that Toys for Bob is spinning off as an independent game development studio. Over the years, we've inspired love, joy, and laughter for the inner child in all gamers. We pioneered new IP and hardware technologies in Skylanders. We raised the bar for best-in-class remasters in Spyro Reignited Trilogy. We've taken Crash Bandicoot to innovative, critically acclaimed new heights. With the same enthusiasm and passion, we believe that now is the time to take the studio and our future games to the next level. This opportunity allows us to return to our roots of being a small and nimble studio. To make this news even more exciting, we're exploring a possible partnership between our new studio and Microsoft. And while we're in the early days of developing our next new game and a ways away from making any announcements, our team is excited to develop new stories, new characters, and new gameplay experiences. Our friends at Activision and Microsoft have been extremely supportive of our new direction, and we're confident that we will continue to work closely together as a part of our future. So keep your horns on and your eyes out for more news. Thank you to our community of players for always supporting us through our journey. We can't wait to share updates on our new adventure as an indie studio. Talk to you soon." So, again, this is a very surprising turn of events, but one that I think is good for Toys for Bob. And from the sounds of it, this does not take away from the future of Spyro and Crash, so long as Toys for Bob wants to continue to work on those franchises. If you want those games made by Toys for Bob, which I certainly do, it sounds like they absolutely will be able to work on those for the foreseeable future. They did, in fact, mention that they are exploring a partnership with Microsoft, which there's no doubt in my mind they will sign a deal together. And what that means is that Xbox will continue to allow Toys for Bob to work on Spyro and Crash going forward. I've seen some people kind of confused by this, but Xbox does still own the Spyro and Crash franchises. So they do need each other, and even in this statement, one line does appear to tease a new Spyro game. Right at the end, they said, quote unquote, "keep your horns on and eyes out for more news," which that is a reference to Spyro having, of course, horns. I mean, a new Spyro game has been rumored for a while now, and I do imagine that Toys for Bob is already working on a new Spyro game. So there's really not going to be a major change for gamers, or at least for the near future when it comes to these IP and Toys for Bob working on them. They will be able to work on Spyro and Crash with a signed partnership that they're working on currently. But what this does do is that it gives Toys for Bob full control of their own destiny. And I mean, honestly, after seeing everything that's happened in the last few years, I can hardly blame them for wanting that full control. I mean, just look at what's happening in the game industry right now. Microsoft themselves just laid off 1,900 employees within Activision Blizzard. And while a lot of that was redundancy, okay, I get that, but Toys for Bob was impacted. And even before those layoffs, Activision was forcing them to support Call of Duty. So they were pulling them away from working on Spyro and Crash. So this could ultimately actually be a good thing for Toys for Bob, as it kind of gives them more security knowing that they are calling their own shots. And for me, as a big fan of their work, that's something that I like to hear. Now, I do understand that there's the other side to this story. How does this impact Xbox, and how could Xbox possibly let a talented studio like Toys for Bob go? And okay, those are fine and fair questions and everything. Maybe they could have put Toys for Bob under Xbox Game Studios, which does have complete creative freedom, but it sounds like that's not what Toys for Bob wanted. And again, I can hardly blame them for wanting to be independent. It's been a theme these last few years. We've seen so many layoffs these past few years, so how could they possibly feel secure with everything that's currently going on? That's probably why being independent is more enticing right now. It really just speaks to the industry and where it's currently at. These companies want to control their own destiny rather than having to worry every single year if their job's next. So this move theoretically will free Toys for Bob from feeling that internal pressure. And as for us, fans of Crash and Spyro, for the time being, you don't have to worry. From the sounds of it, they will continue to work closely with Microsoft, and I assume that they are working on a new Spyro game. It's just this time, technically, it will be developed under an independent studio rather than an Activision studio. If anything, that could actually encourage them to make even better games going forward. I think for Xbox, though, the question for them is what's their plans post Toys for Bob partnership? Do they plan to just renew that partnership every single time they want a new Crash and Spyro game? Because there is that question of the long-term future as well. You kind of look at Banjo-Kazooie, and one of the reasons we haven't seen a new Banjo in over a decade is because they don't have a studio that wants to work on that franchise. So I think the question for Xbox here is what's their plans for these franchises if Toys for Bob decides they want to do something different in the future? Who knows? They might want to eventually work on their own new IP. So what happens then? For the time being, though, it does sound like they absolutely still want to work on these franchises. So you don't have to worry for the near future. But let me know what you all think about all of this in the comments below. Do you think this was a good move or not? And do you think Xbox is maybe making a mistake by letting them go even though they are working on a close partnership together? For me, though, personally, I'm just happy for Toys for Bob, and, as a fan of Spyro and Crash, it does sound like we will continue to get those games as well from Toys for Bob. All right, so yeah, it's been a rough year for the game industry. I think we can all kind of agree on that. And I mean, we were just talking about job security with Toys for Bob, and lo and behold, EA was the latest game company hit by mass layoffs. Last night, they announced that they laid off more than 600 employees. It was actually nearly 700. And unfortunately, this does include some high-profile cancellations and a studio closure as well. This year has just been draining and just downright brutal. I don't know if there's ever been a moment in gaming where I've actually been genuinely concerned about the direction of the game industry. Now, I don't think a game crash is coming or anything like that. I feel like that's a bit of an exaggeration for the time being. But I'd say for me, it's more of the uncertainty of what's going to change in the next 5 to 10 years. Hopefully everything starts to settle down, but nonetheless, EA is in the midst of closing Ridgeline Games. Some of the staff is being moved over to Ripple Effect, which is rumored to be working on a new Battle Royale Battlefield game mode. But as for Ridgeline Games, they reportedly were working on a narrative campaign in the Battlefield universe. However, even with this closure, work on this new Battlefield single-player experience does continue on. So if that is something that you want, it sounds like that you will still absolutely get that, because EA did confirm that Criterion will now oversee the next Battlefield single-player project. Now, I do understand that kind of brings up questions for the next Need for Speed game, just considering Criterion is the Need for Speed studio. But it does appear their main focus will still be on Need for Speed, so hopefully it won't take too much away from that series. But again, I think this kind of takes me back to the Toys for Bob situation. You just see this type of movement from these big publishers and all the support stuff across all of these studios, and yeah, being independent just becomes a lot more enticing with how the industry currently works right now. The other big story that came out of EA, though, and I think this is going to be a little bit more upsetting to fans, they confirmed the cancellation of Respawn's new first-person shooter Star Wars game. Now, this game actually recently leaked by Tom Henderson, and it was allegedly a new Mandalorian game. I mean, we just talked about this game like a week or two back, and I know there's been a lot of excitement for this specific game. I mean, I cannot tell you how many times I've seen requests for a new Mandalorian game in just my comment section alone. So I know a lot of people want this to happen, but unfortunately, it's just not going to happen right now, or at least over at EA. Now, maybe in the future, somebody else picks up this IP and gives it a try. But for the time being, fans of Star Wars will need to look at other projects instead. In fact, EA tried to lessen the blow by confirming Respawn is working on a third Jedi game, so you can be excited about that, and they also further committed to Black Panther and Iron Man's development. Those games will continue on in development, but in large part, EA is pivoting away from licensed IP going forward. They're going to focus more on their own in-house IP. I imagine that kind of comes down to the added cost. Disney licenses probably aren't exactly cheap, and something that we've talked a lot about this year is the ballooning budgets for AAA games. AAA games are already risky as is, and maybe the added cost for these licenses are adding even further risk to those games. I think that's really the big thing going on right now, though. The industry is just trying to figure out how to proceed with these games. These budgets are just getting out of control, and something has to be done. Like I keep saying, the game industry, it's changing, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens over the next 5 to 10 years. Let's talk about something that's actually fun, though. Gaming's supposed to be fun, right? And I think for a lot of people, one of the most memorable games ever made was Chrono Trigger. There's so many people that views that game as an all-time great, and there's been a lot of requests to give it the remake treatment. Well, interestingly enough, in a podcast, Square Enix's Yoshinori Kitase seemingly indicated that he wants to work on some type of Chrono Trigger remake. Reportedly, he was asked several different questions, but then suddenly he himself brought up the topic of a Chrono Trigger remake. He asked the host on how Square Enix should go about remaking Chrono Trigger if they get the opportunity. So he's not necessarily confirming anything here, don't take it that way, but clearly, and this is the good news, is that it is on his mind, and he's been wondering how to go about something like that. Now, the host responded that he liked what Nintendo did with Zelda Link's Awakening, in which Kitase thanked him for his feedback, but that is an interesting question to think about. How would you go about remaking one of the all-time classics? Should they completely remake it? Kind of like how they did with Final Fantasy VII, but instead maybe make it look a little bit more similar to Dragon Quest XI. It does have that Akira Toriyama art style to it, but they could also do it in that HD 2D art style. That could actually work perfectly for a game like Chrono Trigger. You have that HD 2D art style, add some voice dialogue and do things like that, and I think a lot of people would be very excited if they went in that direction. Let me know what you all think about all of this, though. If you were to give Square Enix feedback right now on how to remake Chrono Trigger, what exactly would you hope to see? Now, one last thing that I want to talk about, though, is another studio that freed themselves from their publisher. Remedy Entertainment actually acquired the Control IP from 505 Games, which acted as its publisher. They acquired it for 17 million euros, and this means that Remedy now has full control of Control. In other words, they'll be able to do whatever they want with that Control sequel, and apparently also their new Control multiplayer spinoff. Now, I don't know how all that's going to work out, but this is something that Remedy has done in the past. They actually did something very similar with the Alan Wake IP, getting it off of Xbox years ago. And, I mean, look at what happened. That turned out to be a pretty good decision for them. Remedy recently announced that they were very happy with the results of Alan Wake 2, as it's become their fastest-selling game ever. I mean, okay, sure, it's not putting up GTA type of numbers or anything like that, but for an independent studio like them, they're happy with the results, and that's one of the key differences between being independent and being under an umbrella where you don't have full control. I will say, though, that I am a little surprised that 505 Games let Control go just like that. But hey, if anything, Remedy is cooking right now, and I'll be very excited to see what they do next. Anyways, though, that's going to be it for this episode, but let me know how you feel about the game industry right now. Are you concerned or not? Let me know why. But till next time, peace out.